the Lions had a little bit of good fortune. Ben Johnson wanted to remain. Dan Quinn has already done that, and he's been there, and now he decides he wants to move along and go become a head coach, actually take that opportunity here. First of all, do we have any insight into like kind of how this came about, and also where he might have ranked in kind of that Washington Commanders hierarchy of who they wanted, the wish list?
Yeah, I don't know for certain, but yeah, Ben Johnson is a guy that they were really interested in, and we're actually flying up there to meet with him for that job when he said that he was going to stay. And so I know he was high on their list. I don't know who else was anywhere up there, but if you told me that Ben Johnson was their number one candidate for that job, it would not surprise me at all. I mean, let's be honest, Washington knew they were going to need a head coach for as long as anybody this year in that cycle, and they're the last one to get a head coach. That just lines up with they were waiting for these AFC and NFC championship games to get over, because that's probably what they had their mind on is Ben Johnson or Mike McDonald, who ended up getting the Seattle job. And so I would think that Dan Quinn was probably in the top 2 or 3, and deservedly so. I think it's going to be interesting how Dan Quinn is remembered in Dallas, because people are going to point to that Packers game, and obviously the defense didn't play well at all, but let's not act like Dan Quinn wasn't a really good defensive coordinator. Let's not act like he wasn't a really good head coach. I laugh at people when they say, we talk about the Lions. I'm saying that's the best time I've ever seen them play in that half. He got the Atlanta Falcons to the Super Bowl. That is not like some easy thing to do. I love when people are like, has blown the biggest lead in the Super Bowl. I get it. That's bad. You wouldn't want that on your resume. He also got the Atlanta Falcons to the Super Bowl. So I think he's a really, really good head coach, a really good coach in general. And so I understand right now Commanders fans are probably not that pumped about it because they probably wanted, a different person or whatever, but let's not get it twisted. I mean, Dan Quinn is a good football coach.
How do you make those two things jive, though? Like the idea that he clearly is a good football coach, but, you've had some of those major losses that have happened. And then also particularly, I know that we've been talking about the ways in which it seems like he just has not been able to get over what seems to be the dominant style of offense, the Kyle Shanahan style of offense right now. How do you make those things, jive?
Well, I think the key part in all of that would be his interview. When he sits down with those teams, he's going to be honest about what happened. Mm-hmm. And he's going to be honest in a way that he's not going to be to the media. He's not going to go stand up on the podium. Mm-hmm. Again, I'll bring it back to the Lions. There's a lot of factors in why Dan Campbell made some of those decisions in that game. He's not going to come out and say he had no trust in that kicker from 45 outside. He's not going to come out and tell you, yeah, guys, have you seen our defense all year? Like, we needed to get 7s over and over again to have any chance to be that Niners team. Like, our defense is not in that level yet. It can get there, but it's not there yet. There's a lot of things that coaches are not going to say publicly. Behind the scenes, though, behind the scenes, Dan Quinn could sit down there with Washington and been like, yeah, I had to play this way because I didn't have this guy. This guy can only play this type of coverage. I had to do this because of this right here. He's not going to sit there and throw guys under the bus that are players that maybe they weren't being used in the right way because, hey, this is what he had to work with. There's things that I guarantee you he can sit down and in an interview and explain to an owner, to a general manager, where they would go, yeah, makes sense. It makes sense. I get where you're coming from. That he's never going to say publicly that a fan or anybody on a national talk show is going to understand.
By the way, John, since you brought it up, I got to go back to that game again. I think because I psychoanalyze this, and I love Dan Campbell. This is what I think did him in. I think all year long with them going for 4, going on 4th down and whatever it took, they were aggressive all the time, but they also had the underdog mentality of we got nothing to lose. In that second half, Dan has the mentality he has nothing to lose. He can handle the criticism and the complaints. But his players, for the first time in their lives, had something to lose, and that was a Super Bowl berth. And I think that's what did them in. They couldn't rise to the occasion that he wanted them to do. Maybe if they had been in Detroit, they probably could have pulled it off. But on the road, with that crowd and San Francisco feeling an opening, it was like, oh, God, they gulped. They're like, we're going to lose the Super Bowl that we got a berth in. And they did.
So my thinking on all of that is, you said about if they played it in Detroit. Mm-hmm. If they played in Detroit, I can see him kicking that because they're indoors and they're playing on turf. Mm-hmm. I don't think he trusts that kicker at all. Mm-hmm. And their own kicker, who kicks in that stadium all the time, missed his first kick in that game. If they're at the 35 or the 25 and he does that, I understand a little bit more. my thinking is as much as people have talked about, oh, you don't get that fourth down, you get momentum right back to them. What does a missed 45-yard field goal do for you? It gives the momentum right back to them, too. That's just as deflating as now. So I think his decision-making in that process is, what do I trust more? Our guys converting on this fourth down, fourth and short, or our guy making that 45-yard field goal? And I bet you if you asked him right now, off the record, just man-to-man, sitting at a bar, he would tell you, oh, I would wait. Look how open Reynolds was. Look how good we've been on fourth down this season. I'll run that thing over and over again, but I can't come up here and tell you that. I'm not going to throw the kicker under the bus like that. But I guarantee you he never trusts that guy from 45, not outside.
I got you. So, and I love that, touche. And I love, because people don't even think about that part of the equation. Back to Dan Quinn and the Dallas Cowboys. Who's Dan Quinn going to snap up with him? I heard Joe Witt might be headed that way. Al Harris is a ride or die for Dan Quinn. Who do you think might be leaving with him? Mike, you don't have to be on the record and say this is officially this guy is leaving.
I would say Witt seems likely. I was just listening to you guys talking about the report. That seems very likely. Aaron is longtime NFL writer. I trust that report. I think that and that makes sense. Because the only way Joe Witt would stay is if he's getting the Cowboys DC job for sure. And I don't know that he is. I think that they want to do now. Maybe Mike McCarthy wants him to be, and maybe Jerry and Steven want to do a bigger search. I don't know that. I'm just speculating that I think that if they told Joe Witt, slam dunk, you're the DC right now, I think he would stay in Dallas. I don't know that for sure, but that's just where I think. So he would be the one for sure I would think of. And then that could also certainly lead to Dirty. It could lead to Al Harris, no question. Then it all comes down to the DC you hire. Who are the guys that DC wants to bring in? Because let's be honest, everybody's got their guys that, hey, if I get this job, I want you to be my DB coach. Hey, if I get this job, I want you to be my linebackers coach. And so I think that would be more appealing to another DC if they are looking outside the building that, well, no, we're not just going to stick you with our coaching staff. We're going to let you bring in some guys, too, that you trust, that can run your system and things like that. I just think that if it was going to be Joe Witt, they would just announce it today. But I think they want to do a bigger search than just the go in-house.
We're talking to Jon Machota of The Athletic. He covers the Dallas Cowboys for The Athletic. Now, Johnny, when it comes to this, I know that you're not inside of that room. You don't know exactly what those guys are thinking. And when I say that, I mean like the guys that are making the decision, the brain trust of the Cowboys. But if you were to kind of make your best guess, what would you say are maybe like the top priorities in trying to fill this defensive coordinator position?
Well, if it isn't Joe Witt and you are going outside, I think it has to be someone that has previous defensive coordinator in the NFL experience and probably head coaching in the NFL experience. If they don't hire someone that was a previous NFL head coach, that'll be the first time since 2013. I tweeted this earlier today. It'll be the first time since Monty Kiffin in 2013 that their DC is somebody who's not a previous head coach. With Mike McCarthy's DCs going all the way back to 2008 are all guys that have been previous head coaches. Don Capers, Mike Patton, Mike Nolan, Dan Quinn. You have to go back to his first 3 years when it was Bob Sanders was his DC. I mean, that's the last time. That's 2008 that he has had a DC who hasn't had previous NFL head coaching experience. And that makes sense why you would want a guy like that, because Mike's calling the offense. Mike's also the head coach. He's got a lot on his plate. You can't be around the defense as much as you are if you are just the head coach. Again, we'll bring it back to Detroit. If you are Dan Campbell, you're more of the walk-around head coach. You got Aaron Glenn coaching the defense. You got Ben Johnson coaching the offense. You can have a hand on both sides of it. Mike McCarthy has to have most 75, 80, maybe 90% has to be focused on getting the offense right and doing things on offense. He needs somebody that is got head coaching type capabilities to be running that defense, because that defense is going to be their baby. It's not going to be, he isn't going to be stepping in. Like, for example, Dan Quinn being a head coach, or some of these other head coaches that have taken over that are previous DCs, the new coach in Seattle, they're going to have a much bigger hand in the defense than, let's say, Mike McCarthy is. So I do think it's kind of attractive for, let's say, a Ron Rivera or somebody like a Brandon Staley or even a Mike Vrabel. Like, I could see why that would make sense, because it's like, hey, that's your side of the ball. You take care of that. I'm going to take care of this.
I was going to ask you, does Rivera have a real shot? How much of a shot do you think he has? And does he have any kind of relationship with McCarthy?
I think he does have a real shot. I think that the relationship from what I know, is just the fact that, he's been the Commanders coach while Mike's been coaching the Cowboys for the last 4 years. I think that's the only thing, just knowing each other, going against each other, but no crossing paths in terms of coaching on staffs together or anything like that. So, I mean, obviously he's going to know the Cowboys defense very well from just playing so many games against them the last few years. I totally understand. There's people listening to this right now, and they're gonna be the same way about him as they were about Kellen Moore or Dan Quinn in the end. That's not going to be the hire that excites fans. I totally get it. But at the same time, I could see behind the scenes, again, when they sit down and interview him, if he comes with a plan where they're like, man, that certainly sounds like something that would fit Micah. Man, that seems like that would be perfect for Diggs and Bland. Yeah, and our back end of our defense would play well if we do it that way. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, just because you don't have a ton of success as an offensive coach or as a head coach doesn't mean you can't have success as a defensive coordinator. And to be honest with you, he has had success as a head coach. Again, like I said about Dan Quinn taking the Falcons to the Super Bowl, imagine taking the Carolina Panthers to the Super Bowl. So let's not act like Ron Rivera can't coach.
We're talking to Jon Machota. And John, before we let you go real quick, I want to go back a few days to when obviously Jerry Jones was quoted as saying that this team is going to be all in this season. What was your interpretation of his statement there, and what does that kind of look like in your imagination?
Oh, that right there is the greatness of Jerry Jones being Jerry Jones. And I say that so I started covering the Cowboys in 2011, and man, I mean, and still really even to this day, who are we kidding here? I listen to all of his radio interviews. I'm always at whatever he's at, whether it's home or road. He's talking after a game, I'm by Jerry Jones. So the amount of hours I've spent listening to Jerry Jones is probably, I would put up with anybody over this last 10, 13 years. The key that he does is he likes to talk out of both sides of the argument, and he does that so we will continue talking and writing about it.
Yep.
If he just comes out and says one thing or the other, it just ends the conversation, and he doesn't want that. He doesn't care that it causes drama, and it might be uncomfortable for others. It's great for business, and he loves that. He does not want to stand there in Mobile and say, yeah, we're going to get a contract done with Dak. He's a franchise quarterback. There's no doubt about it. We don't even need to talk about this, guys. Eventually it's going to get done. He's not going to say anything because that's too clear-cut, which also – in his 27 minutes talking in Mobile, one of my favorite Jerry lines is when he says, let me be real clear. Let me be clear. When he says that, whatever's going to follow is not going to be clear at all. So I always love that about Jerry. But he does this stuff on purpose so that you guys could go into your pre-show meetings and you could be like, all right, Reggie, you take this side of the argument. I'm going to take this side of the argument. And you can take this little part that Jerry said, and then I'll take this part that Jerry said. And you can work arguments for both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's a fantastic point, and it's one of the tough parts about dealing with the Cowboys because you have to listen to them, but also Jerry be talking, as we always say. He covers these Dallas Cowboys for The Athletic. He's very good at it, mind you, and you can find him at Jon Machota on Twitter. It's Jon Machota. We appreciate you greatly, my man.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me on.